Rex woke me up. I was fighting a mean old man with the claws.
You have no idea who this is calling?
Freddy for all I
Okay, before I begin today's video, I want to clear up a little problem that seems to have arisen from my Scream 4 review. That being the definition of the term meta. Now, anybody who watched it saw me look it up in the dictionary, no help. I checked the comment section, no help from anybody. And thank you guys for staying very, very calm on the matter and not getting, all out of shape about me not knowing what meta means. So, yeah, I don't know what it means, but I know a man who does. The only man who ever would. Theme song, please.
Bleep, sausage, prostitute, popular fun questions.
Sorry. Panda, what does meta actually mean?
That's a very good question. Back in the 80s, Metallica, the band, was actually considered hair metal because they had long hair and played metal. But time going on and we discovered that they became lazy and released the same album over and over again and nobody started caring about it. And even their fans that really wanted to be like Metallica started being really lazy and have long hairs. Which means instead of saying Metallica, they would just say meta when referring to the band. So what I'm trying to say is meta is actually being lazy and having long hair. Just like you.
True to form, that made absolutely no sense. Whatever. I guess I'll never find out what it means. Anyway, video time. Today I'm doing Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which you should already know if you've seen the title of this video. Some people might think I'm doing this as a response to a fellow reviewer's own review, but it's not the case. I've always actually intended to review this film. It is my favourite Nightmare film, and I think, as I've said in the past, it is Wes Craven's best film ever. The film drips with atmosphere. Movie references, metaphors, symbolism, surreal imagery, fourth wall breaking moments, conversations about religion, movie within a movie references, callbacks, and just the effect horror can have on children and the actors, cast and crew who work on them. It's a fascinating take on a horror slasher, and to me, it represents Craven's peak as a filmmaker, writer, and storyteller. That being said, there are a lot of people out there who don't like it. Hundreds apparently. They wanted the old Freddy, the extreme dream sequences, and the multi-death creative kills. This is not that movie. This isn't a nightmare film where it's meet character, character falls asleep, character dies. If you like those films, more power to you. But, if you want to rag on this film for being different, then I expect that was gagged. This is Nightmare, primal and stripped to the bare bones. The film only has 4 deaths, but this isn't a film about cutting and killing. This is about creating a mood and an atmosphere, and sucking you into the world as it slowly blurs the lines between the real world and the dream world until eventually both versions merge into one. The first time I watched it, I was in my room, on my own, at 11 o'clock at night, and I was locked into what I was watching. The film reunites most of the original Nightmare cast, only here, the film follows the actors who portrayed the original roles. Heather Langenkamp portrays herself, Robert Englund, John Saxon, Wes Craven, Bob Shaye. They all play themselves to a certain degree, and it's a pretty clever idea, and pretty ballsy in some respects, making the film unique to the Nightmare series and the slasher genre in general. It was also the perfect way to bring Heather Langenkamp back into the Nightmare universe. Nancy was the first protagonist to battle Freddy, and through that alone it made her the most memorable and popular. Although I admit, Lisa Wilcox's Alice Johnson would certainly be able to give her a run for her money in that department. Having Nancy and Freddy face off again for the series' 10th anniversary gave me the same feeling I had when I saw Laurie and Michael face to face after 20 years in Halloween H2O. It just felt good seeing them go at it again. One of the biggest complaints fans had about the film was the Freddy they got. Some claimed he wasn't in it enough, some claimed he wasn't the Freddy they were used to. As for not being in it enough, his presence is felt through the whole film, hanging over it in this foreboding manner. Craven also wanted to make the actors the main characters, not Freddy himself, something that the past Nightmare films had all been guilty of. As far as Freddy goes, Craven always lamented Freddy being turned into a clown. And if you think back to the first Nightmare, Freddy rarely appears, and when he does, he takes his time, sure, but when he kills, he's vicious about it. By the time Freddy's Dead came out, Freddy was the star, and while still a killer, he was loved by the public because of it. This wasn't the version of Freddy Craven had in mind when he pitched the idea to the studio for the first time, and if the studio had originally been in support of it, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 would have been this film. The film, surprisingly, was a hit with critics, but not with the mass public, although it has gained a much larger appreciation as the years have gone by. So yeah, I love this film. People out there don't, but I'm fine with that. Fine. The film opens, like the first Nightmare, with Freddy constructing his claw, only in this case it's a metallic hand claw, and then uses a cleaver to remove his own normal hand. 15 years later, in Saw 6, they top this by cleaving off an entire arm.
More blood! Great, keep coming, Chuck. Terry, pump away.
The sequence is in fact a film shoot where the primary cast are all introduced, Heather Langenkamp playing herself, David Newson playing her husband Chase, and Miko Hughes playing their son Dylan. The sequence also features Wes Craven directing the film set, playing himself, and various cameos from the behind-the-scenes staff of Craven's crew. While Chase converses with Heather, Chuck and Terry of his special effects crew, the claw suddenly comes to life, kills Chuck and Terry before zeroing in on Chase. So while the opening sequence was simply a dream, it also lays some important points for what's going to be coming later in the movie. The film then sets about laying some of the grounding facts. The earthquakes have been a regular occurrence.
I think 5 earthquakes in 3 weeks is enough.
Heather has been receiving phone calls from an obsessed fan.
Hello?
A story point made all the more true to life as Langenkamp, for a time anyway, had been receiving phone calls from an obsessed fan, and that Heather doesn't allow Dylan to watch any of her films. It's also the first hint in the story about dreams affecting reality, where Heather sees Chase has cut his fingers.
Where did you get that?
Oh, picture, I guess. When it fell. It's no big deal.
With the 10th anniversary of the first Nightmare film approaching, Heather will be taking part in some of the publicity, doing interviews, and good God, Heather has developed into a stunning MILF. Excuse me, I got a little sidetracked there. Where was I? While Chase leaves for a 2-day commercial shoot, dropping plenty of hints that his fate is pretty much sealed.
I think I can survive 2 days in Palm Springs. I'll be back in no time.
Yeah, as if he needed any more hints, he's definitely not coming back alive. The film also plays with the character's psyche. An aftershock causes cracks to appear in the wall, shaped like Freddy's claws, but the obvious explanation is that they were caused by the aftershock. It's all part of the film's slow build, and it works really well. Trying to introduce a formula that this may or may not be a Freddy attack, the film introduces Julie, Dylan's babysitter, who from the off plays the role in such a way that you could actually suspect she might have an ulterior motive. Heather leaves for her interview to promote the Nightmare anniversary, and in one of the most surreal scenes of the film, Freddy makes his entrance. And what I love about this scene is this is the clown Freddy. This is the Freddy we've been seeing for the last couple of movies. He's playing to the crowd, he's wisecracking, he's high-fiving people, and he's being cheered by children and adults. And no one is afraid of him. This is pretty much Craven's commentary on what Freddy has become by this point, and this shot, I love that shot. Continuing the surreal sense the film's been going for, it then switches to a small scene of Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp just talking like old friends. It doesn't really add anything, but as this is a Nightmare film, just seeing the two of them together only adds to the surrealism. Before returning home, Heather receives a phone call from New Line Cinema for a meeting with Bob Shaye. Some people probably don't know who Bob Shaye is, so I'll just say this. He's the man who not only greenlit The Lord of the Rings, but was the one who insisted it be a trilogy, because originally Peter Jackson had only written 2 scripts, because Miramax, when it was going to be made by Miramax, wanted the film to be made in 2. When they took it to New Line Cinema, Bob Shaye said, no, we'll make it 3. So you've got Bob Shaye to thank for that, or if you're Kevin Smith, you've got Bob Shaye to hate for it. At the office, Bob pitches the idea of a new Nightmare film, claiming Wes Craven has been having nightmares which helps him write. Again, a fact that was true to his writing of the first Nightmare film. Heather is flattered, but ultimately turns him down, though Bob almost seems demented in his pitch and reveals Chase has been working on a new glove for Freddy.
How long has Wes been working on this script?
And when questioned about his nightmares, he clams up and then refuses to answer the phone. You could almost say that the film is almost like a documentary at this point. It's followed Heather's home life, her publicity tour, and a pitch from a movie executive. And in the commentary, Wes Craven states that it's almost eerily similar to the pitch that he gave to Heather when they were talking about making the film. Heather returns home and finds Dylan freaking out, which is, I assume, the film's attempt to push suspicion onto Julie. Heather calls Chase, who reveals that Chuck and Terry are MIA, but on the news that Dylan is sick and that she's had another phone call, Chase heads home, with a final shot revealing that the new Freddy glove has disappeared. Later that night, Heather reads the story of Hansel and Gretel to Dylan, a story thread that carries through the entire film and sets up plot points for later in the movie. Where is Freddy coming from? Dylan's toy Rex acting as a guardian. It's all nicely set up, with Heather humouring him and playing it off as a little boy's nightmare.
Rex keeps him down there.
And for me, this is Miko's best scene, where he comes across as very natural in his delivery as opposed to forced when he's trying to do his Freddy impression. The same night, while driving home, Chase fights Sleep, and we get teases of the new Freddy claw until Chase, well, you'll see. This is another departure from the Nightmare films. No dream sequences, no elaborate Chase one-liners. Freddy just kills him, viciously, which sends the car veering off-road. Later, Heather is called to identify the body, which leads to a line I've always found slightly amusing.
Sometimes it's what we don't see that gets us through the night.
I've always liked the line because in horror, it's general notion that it's what you don't see that's the most effective. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that the line was meant to be ironic. At Chase's funeral, many of the cast and crew members from the Nightmare films are present, including John Saxon, who played Nancy's father in the first Nightmare, again playing himself. After another earthquake, Heather has a vision of Freddy pulling Dylan down into hell, and although this is another dream, it again shows Freddy being a darker version than the Freddy we're used to. Later that night, Heather and Dylan talk about Chase.
Daddy's in heaven. He's with God now.
And more interestingly, they talk about religion.
Why does God let there be bad things?
I really like this scene because it's interesting because you don't ever really see it in a slasher film. For starters, Heather's just lost her husband, Dylan his father, and instead of just like, he dies and they move on, they actually take time to reflect on the loss and bring up a lot of questions that are very human. I mean, if anybody out there has suffered a loss, sometimes people do question God. And whether God exists, or why does God allow these things to happen? And what's interesting about it is that Craven himself admits that he did that very thing when his father died when he was young. The next day, Heather and John meet at the park, where Heather confesses a number of her fears and paranoia, all of which John manages to talk around, but manages to make it believable how he does it.
Everything about Dylan's behavior is understandable for a kid who just lost his father.
At this point, the film is still playing with the audience, walking that fine line of making you think something more sinister might be going on, or that it could all just be in Heather's head. The scene doesn't feel forced thanks to a good script and a grounded, real performance from John Saxon. Of course, it does take a turn when they see Dylan reaching for the stars. Bad taste, I'm sorry.
God wouldn't take me.
That is really dark, especially for a kid. Back home, we discover Heather's been getting messages in the mail, although, to be more specific, it's a single-lettered message, but she's been keeping them for evidence. She then calls Robert Englund and they both discuss the new Freddy.
It isn't you. He's scarier.
Darker.
And it's stated, though not said, that Robert's been having nightmares too. Strangely, this is Robert Englund's last appearance in the movie as himself, which I was always disappointed with, as my only regret with this film is we never got to see Robert Englund meet the new Freddy Krueger. That is really all the film was missing for me. That night, while Heather sleeps, Freddy's claw presses through the sheets and slowly moves in on her. And in a callback to the bath scene from the first Nightmare, Freddy almost seems to be savouring the kill. Heather awakens from the dream, only to find Dylan wandering the kitchen singing the Freddy song.
Never sleep.
Kid's got serious issues. But it's another dream, and Heather awakens to find Dylan, as in her dream, wandering the kitchen, only now he's arranged the letters into a message. This is a point where I do have to praise Heather Langenkamp's performance, as she's starting to look increasingly more bedraggled due to the event she's going through.
I touched him.
Not only is this a truly disturbing scene, it's a great callback to the memorable tongue scene from Nightmare 1, but then takes it to a whole new level with the foam and the fit. Deciding to follow John's advice, Heather takes Dylan to the hospital where he's examined by Dr. Hefner. A clear shot from Craven to Richard Hefner, the former head of the MPAA who made Craven's life a living hell with his cut demands. So as you'd expect, Hefner is written as a character who blames horror films for their influence on children. Heather is told she has to leave Dylan so he can have treatment and tests, but this is the first time in the film Heather starts to show she believes Dylan.
Look, right out there, past the freeway, is our home.
And with Dylan safe, Heather goes to meet Wes Craven. You want to talk surreal. Craven writes himself almost like a Yoda Zen-like character. only with a serious satanic edge, as he, as the writer, knows what he's putting and going to put her through, but he still refuses to stop writing his movie.
Did you know?
It was a script. It was a dream. I didn't know.
Craven surmises the new Freddy, describing the Freddy of the movies as an evil entity, yet contained to the Nightmare films. Only now, with the films over, the entity wants to break through into reality, keeping the guise of Freddy, and to do it, it is targeting Freddy's greatest enemy, Nancy, the first person to ever beat him.
What kind of choice?
Whether or not you're willing to play Nancy one last time.
That night, it's announced that Chuck and Terry have been found dead, bringing more credibility to the opening dream death, until another earthquake destroys Heather's coffee pot, and with her last defense against sleep lost,
Miss me?
Freddy attacks, bigger, leaner, and more vicious than before. It's an entrance that's been long awaited, and the whole film has been building up to this reveal. This is also a sign that the film is stepping it up a gear, and things are about to, quite literally in fact, go to hell. Heather fights him off before another apparent quake, and Freddy's own claw making contact with her arm awakens her from the dream. Something I'm really enjoying about this film is that in past Nightmare movies, you could always tell when the character had slipped into the dream due to the events and the occurrences happening around them, be it a sheep or them appearing in somewhere where they shouldn't be, or by simply not in their head. Here, Craven keeps everything real and contained, so when Freddy does attack, it is unexpected because you don't realise she's dreaming. Fearing for Dylan, Heather heads to the hospital only to discover Julie, who apparently had a bad dream about Dylan and wants to check up on him. Heather and Hefner get into an argument about Freddy, which allows Heather to reel off a really great line.
Every kid knows who Freddy is. He's like Santa Claus.
Because it's true. And I always felt this was Craven almost subtly pointing the finger at the parents and saying, Freddy Krueger is known because you let your children watch him. I mean, keep in mind, this is before YouTube, this is before the internet boom, so you couldn't just go to a computer and type in Freddy Krueger kills Jason or Freddy Krueger kills Tina and get the whole video up. No, you'd have to watch it on VHS tapes, and if kids know about Freddy Krueger, it's because the parents have been letting them watch him. And it also shows how little media and society have grown when it comes to blaming horror films for violent behaviour instead of looking at the family unit itself. Am I saying horror films and video games aren't an influence or the complaint isn't justified? Of course I'm not. But media and society at large is always ready to blame them and not look at the home life or the bigger picture, instead opting for the quick fix. And the Hefner character, as she's written, being accusatory and judgmental, pretty much sums up that side of society perfectly. While Dylan sleeps in an oxygen tent, Heather experiences another nightmare which allows the film to throw in an Exorcist homage, and when Heather awakens, now with grey hair, another callback to the first film, she learns that Dylan has been moved, which leads to another callback.
Do you have a pass?
Screw your pass. Where's your pass? Screw your pass.
And what I love about these callbacks is they don't seem forced in to create a link to the first film. They actually make sense in the story and the narrative. If you recognise them as a callback, great, but you don't need to follow the film. Heather gets to Dylan, but the hospital won't allow her to take him, and then trick Dylan by drugging him. Smug bitch!
Bitch.
Atta girl. And in that one sequence, Julie is now firmly established as someone on Heather and Dylan's side. Now drugged, Dylan falls asleep and Freddy kills Julie in a callback to the Tina death of Nightmare 1. This, although a nice little callback, just isn't as effective as the Tina death. The Tina death was violent and brutal, with no music, just her screams. Here, it's played much more as a movie moment, with the music, and it just doesn't have the same impact. Now virtually sleepwalking, Dylan heads home looking for Rex, which takes him across the freeway. Heather follows and we get some insanely crazy imagery, multiple Freddys, Freddy appearing in the sky as he toys with Dylan and Heather, all the while driving Dylan back to the house. And what follows is, as far as I'm concerned, the best sequence in the entire movie. With John at the house, having arrived after Heather called him, she discovers Dylan alive and clutching Rex, and leaving him, the sequence slowly begins to bleed into the first Nightmare film, and it's done brilliantly.
Fred Krueger did it.
Yeah, sure.
Fred Krueger did it, Daddy.
Yeah, sure.
As the merging continues, John calls her Nancy, which goes unnoticed, and Freddy begins to come up out of the bed. The bleeding continues as John, still calling Heather Nancy, appears in his Nightmare 1 outfit. Heather, though, continues to question and fight what is happening, and while Freddy waits, she reluctantly accepts her fate and her role.
I love you too, Daddy.
And as soon as she accepts, Freddy breaks through into the real world. I love this moment. The music, the score, the direction, the performance. It's a powerful sequence that doesn't need words to show what is happening. And it's got a nice tribute to Nosferatu thrown in as well. Outside the house, Heather, now back in the role of Nancy, finds herself in her night clothes from the first Nightmare film, standing outside the original Elm Street house. Keeping with the theme of Hansel and Gretel, just swapping out the breadcrumbs, Heather follows a trail of sleeping pills, finds Rex, now slashed to pieces, and follows Dylan down into Freddy's domain, ending up right where the film started. And as Heather stalks the area looking for Dylan, we get some nice callbacks to Freddy stalking Heather through the basement of the first Nightmare film, until she discovers Dylan and Freddy. And they fight, using snakes, knives, and anything they can get their hands on, with Heather now fighting for her son just as much as she's fighting for herself. Eventually, Freddy does overpower Heather and sets his sights on Dylan, with Miko actually doing a really good impression of being scared, although that's probably because he really was by this point. Managing to lock himself away in a fiery furnace, Freddy, using the power of the dream, reaches out and, in a quite hideous image, attempts to eat him, which is in itself a callback to Nightmare 3. As is the sinking steps, a callback to Nightmare 1. Heather stabs Freddy, Dylan stabs his tongue. Poor guy. And finally trapping him inside the furnace, Freddy burns, taking his natural form of the demon evil before he explodes, sending Heather and Dylan back into Dylan's room, where Heather discovers a completed script and a thank you note from Wes Craven.
Thanks for having the guts to play Nancy one last time.
Just a thank you. Damn right he should be thanking her. I'd be ready to kill him if it was me. And that's New Nightmare. It's a huge step above the norm for a slasher film, containing themes and elements that those films would never touch. Its own subtle and surreal moments were a precursor to the Scream films, though where the Scream films went for parody and tongue-in-cheek, New Nightmare treats the whole thing very seriously, which only adds to the tension and atmosphere the film generates. And I can't finish this without mentioning the actors themselves. The film features a truly standout performance from Robert Englund as he plays a version of himself, the camp clown version of Freddy, and this more primal, sinister version of Freddy, and manages to make them all completely different and distinctive. And I'm not knocking Jackie Earle Haley here, because I think he did a damn good job with the Freddy he was given in the remake. But this one movie just cemented why only Robert Englund should ever play this role. Kind of like how I could never see another actor playing Jigsaw or Jack Sparrow. Robert Englund brought a unique energy to the role and just completely made it his own. And nobody, not even the worst actor in the world, not even the greatest actor in the world, Daniel Day-Lewis, as far as I'm concerned, is the best actor in the world today. Even he couldn't pull off a better Freddy Krueger. Heather Langenkamp also deserves huge props, not only for working on a film that reflects very closely on her own life, but for her own performance. Playing a variation of herself may seem easy, but her subtle character changes as the film goes on, from a more haggard and tired performance to becoming a believer in Dylan, to the moment where she finally accepts the role of Nancy, is so perfectly handled. From her look before delivering the line, to the look on her face before she turns around to see the Elm Street house. She just knows, even before she turns around, what will be there when she does. I think it is the perfect bookend to the Nightmare franchise. Almost like you could take Rocky and Rocky Balboa and have them play as the perfect sequel, you could do the same here. I'd also recommend anybody who has the DVD to listen to the commentary track. Craven does a commentary track completely on his own, and he's one of the few directors, to anybody, who can actually carry a track completely on his own. There's hardly any dead spots, and everything he says is interesting because he goes into a lot of detail on the behind the scenes, the writing, the dealing with studio execs, so definitely check that out as well. That's it for now. If you'll excuse me, I'm off to get my meta on by listening to some Metallica.
I'm a twat.
Campaign? We're in the middle of a chase, Porthos. You're right. Something red. All for one? One for all!